Welcome back to The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood. My name is Sonny Bunch. I'm culture editor at The Bulwark, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Colby Day. Now, Colby, a working screenwriter since 2017. He is the writer of Spaceman. It's a Netflix movie that's coming out here soon. And the screenwriter of In the Blink of an Eye, which was a Blacklist appearing screenplay back in 2016. That is in, I think you said just finished shooting? Is that just
finished,
wrapped up?
Yeah,
awesome.
Just in the nick of time.
Got it in just in the nick of time. Which it brings me to kind of the subject of this episode. So, one of the reasons I wanted to have Colby Day on today was because a former guest of The Bulwark Goes to Hollywood, John Zalzirni, turned me onto a series of Medium posts he has written over the last couple years here, just highlighting the amount of work that goes into actually getting work in Hollywood if you are a screenwriter, which is
a lot.
It is a daunting sort of process here. But thanks for being on the show, Colby. I really appreciate it.
I'm so excited to be on, and I'm so happy that John recommended me as a resource. I think he's a very smart guy. We're just Twitter buddies, but he seems like a good one.
He is fantastic to follow if you are on Twitter and interested in screenwriting. So let's talk about life as a screenwriter when you're not actually sitting down and writing something, that you've been hired to do. I don't think people really understand the process of getting work in Hollywood. I mean, for actors, there are movies where you watch and people go to, auditions and tryouts, and like you can kind of understand that. But I think with writers, it's different because this is all behind the scenes. I mean, writing is writing, but not all writing is for pay. Walk us through what your average kind of year looks like to get from like unemployed to employed.
Oh boy. How long do we have?
Well, this is great because now I've asked this question, so now I can just I can sit back for the next 30 minutes.
Sit back. Here we go. Well, I think that the interesting thing that I've discovered, which nobody really prepares you for as you're learning to be a writer, is that a big part of your job is auditioning. And it's not called auditioning, but it is to come in and have a meeting about a project or a book or a comic book or an article someone read on Reddit and tell them, here's what I would do. So the amount of work that goes into that is, you generally have to come in and propose, here's how the movie would go, which is sort of like a, 15-minute presentation on here's what the story would be, here's what the themes are, here's how the movie would work, here's why you should hire me to do that. And the amount of times you do that over the year, depending, I guess, on how often you close a deal, is I think that I'm generally working on about 8 things at a time. And I've had about 1 to 2 projects move forward to the point of being paid to work on them each year since about 2017. I think there are years where it's a little higher and a little lower, but I think I would generally work on about 15 things over the course of a year.
All right, and let's talk about let's try and help people understand what that actually looks like in terms of prep, in terms of writing, in terms of like things you actually have to put together at a pitch meeting. Like, what is it? What is your like actual work process like when you're preparing for something like this?
Yeah, I basically will be sent, and this is all the privileged position of being someone who does work, right? So this is, first you need to pass the barrier of entry of people thinking of you as a person that's viable to hire. So once you've passed that tremendous hurdle, then you have agents or producers or managers who send you a piece of material and say, would you want to work on this? You can write original material. I've been doing that the whole time I've worked. In the Blink of an Eye, which is the movie I had on the blacklist, is the first piece of original material that I've had get produced in the 6-7 years that I've worked in Hollywood. the vast majority of the work you get is to come in and sort of tackle something that's pre-existing. So what happens at that point is you get sent, here's a short story. I will read the short story. I will kind of do a preliminary few hours of prep work as far as like, how would this work? Could this be a movie? What would the movie look like? And then you have a meeting, and you have a meeting with probably like the lowest junior person on the team who's trying to produce this movie. And they tell you, here's the 10 ways we've already tried to do this that haven't worked. And you say, okay, great. I have a slightly different version. How is this? And that's an hour meeting. And then you spend, a week or two based on their feedback to try to come up with, okay, here's a way that I could tell you the movie in about 20 minutes. And that really entails sitting down and doing the vast majority of the work, honestly. Like you're trying to figure out what would the story of the movie be. And this is for free. And you're also doing this in competition with probably 5 to 12 other writers, some of whom are kind of at your junior level, and then most of whom are probably at a higher level than you and a little bit more in demand. And you pitch, again, your idea to this executive. If they really love it, they'll then add one more person from the team. That sort of is the metric for like, did I do a good job? Is like, am I getting a higher person within the corporate structure on the next call? And so you'll start with a creative executive, you'll pitch them. If they like it, you'll have, feedback from them, and then another week or two before you come in and pitch it to them and like a vice president. And then you'll hear from the vice president how he really doesn't like this thing you decided would happen in Act 3. So you spend 2 weeks trying to figure out what could happen that's not that the vice president doesn't like. Then you'll talk to the vice president again, and then you'll have another couple weeks where you work on it. And then they'll add, the president of production or an SVP or whoever like actually decides. And then you'll pitch to whomever actually decides. And that'll generally include like a financier as well, not just the producers. So you start to get a Zoom meeting with, what started out as you and one other person sort of becomes like a Zoom meeting of like 12 people as you kind of move up the ranks of this. And this has all taken place over the course of about 3 months. And then you pitch the project. You tell them, here's how the entire movie would go. Here's why that's exciting. Here's what would happen. Here's all the crazy events that, are big blockbuster material. And then they say, great, we'll think about it. We'll talk to you later. And I would say of, 8 to 10 of those, I'll get one. And I think I don't know what other people's numbers are. That's why I started writing these Medium posts, because I just was like, am I doing a bad job? Am I doing a good job? Is 10% good? Is 5% good? Like, what's the metric? But it all happens within this weird black box, the writing part for the writer, but then also the decision-making part. And so I think it's really easy as the screenwriter to kind of feel like, is this how it works? Am I doing it the way I'm supposed to do it? I still don't know. And I've written these for 2 years, and I've had many people write back and tell me, oh yeah, this is what it's like. But it all happens in this weird black box where you just are in a meeting with an executive, and they're not going to tell you if they're asking for more work from you than other people, or, you're doing a better job or a worse job. Like, you just don't know. So I do that all year long, and then I hope that one of those hires me. And if I can get one job in the year, that's generally, if you're in the guild, about enough to survive on for the year in features. But to get the one, you really have to go out for, 20. I think in 2021, I went out for something like 15 to 20 different movies and got none of them.
So you mentioned hearing from folks. I mean, what do you hear from other writers when you put these up? I mean, is it just like, yes, this is my life, or what is the response?
It's interesting. The response to here's how frustrating this job is has overwhelmingly been, yes, you're correct. And I actually found that really reassuring. And I think that it's really easy to do this work kind of in the void, and because your only feedback is the one person who's deciding whether or not to buy the thing you're selling, it feels really, really hard to know if you're doing a good or bad job. And I think that overwhelmingly the features landscape, especially for feature writers, is one where everybody wants you to adapt a piece of material. You are in sort of like a bake-off, which is what we call like you're competing against other writers for that job. And, 50% of the time that's a project that then the studio decides they're not going to pursue anyway. And so you all do all this work, and then your manager is like, yeah, I don't know, they didn't figure it out. You're like, okay, well, I did a ton of free work, and let's see what happens. So it's I think it is uniformly the problem in feature writing that the amount of free work required is, it's close to 50% of the work of writing the movie. You really are trying to figure out the outline of a film prior to being paid anything.
Well, so this is one of the things I know the writers have long complained about, I think for fair reasons. And one of the things that I believe is being addressed in the current WGA action. What's your sense of how that is playing with the studios, if you have one at all? I'm curious what you make of the kind of current state of play with regard to the writer strike and how things are rolling.
Yeah, the TV business has always been an easier thing to deal with in terms of studio contract negotiations, because it's really clear metrically how it works, and it's a really codified system. TV works in a sort of production line manner that makes it easy to sort of build like union guarantees. Features are the like Wild West of like, do you or don't you want to buy the movie, and are we going to make it or not? Maybe we'll have one writer, maybe we'll have 8 writers. So it's always sort of been the hardest thing to wrangle within studio negotiations, and the constant in every negotiation is free work, and the amount of free work you have to do to get a job, and then the amount of free work you do once you have the job, which is like the second part of the ask here. So there has sort of been a consistent push amongst feature writers that, what if we got paid to pitch movies? We are doing work, and shouldn't you get compensated to do work? So that is one of the asks. I think that that's a non-starter, honestly. Like, I just think it's been on the table every negotiation, and it just seems like it won't happen. I think it would fundamentally change the ecosystem of Hollywood, and I think it would fundamentally change it for the better. I think that there is no capacity for like diversity, equity, and inclusion in this business until you pay people to do the work they're doing, and to get people to like spend 3 months, 6 months working on something for free means that the only people doing it are people who have the capacity to work for free.
Well, all right, so I'll play devil's advocate here and push back with the counter argument, right? Which is that the counter argument that you hear is if we, the studios, are required to pay people to come in and pitch us ideas, we're only going to bring in people we know, who we've worked with, who we think can deliver the product. We're not going to take a chance on some random person that the manager wants to send us. Do you think that's a fair counter, or is that just a dodge?
I think that is the counter. I don't actually think it's a fair counter, because the people who are coming in to pitch on material anyway are already pre-vetted industry professionals for the most part. Like, you're rarely getting someone that you found online, who like has good writing. You're generally bringing in people who have some sort of track record, even if it's just like, hey, we think this is a promising writer. So I do think it's kind of a dodge. And I also think that the same like market forces still exist, which is a younger writer will be less expensive. Like, a less experienced writer will remain less expensive the whole way through. And so to say that, well, we won't bring younger writers into the process is kind of a spurious debate, because like no, you will. That's cheaper. It's cheaper to bring in younger writers. So I just sort of think that that's a dodge, and it's sort of a way to say this work isn't work when it is work. and I think it excludes people who could and should be paid for the work that they're doing and can't afford to not be.
Yeah. The other element of the free work here is something that, again, I think a lot of people don't really kind of understand how certainly feature writing works in terms of the payment schedules, how, how many rewrites are expected to do, what counts as something that's been accepted versus hasn't been. Could you run through that for us, for folks who don't necessarily know how that works?
Yeah, we're getting into the nitty-gritty of deals,
Yes.
which I love. So the way that a features deal normally works is you are hired to perform writing services, and that can mean there's a few different steps that are part of your deal. So in an ideal deal, you would be hired to deliver an outline or a treatment. And that's basically, here's what the movie will be, just in prose. It's a short document. It just is to say, here's what I think the movie will be. From that stage, you would then be hired on a second step, which would be, okay, write a draft of the movie. So that would be your first draft. In an ideal deal, you would then be hired to do a revision of the movie, and that would be the second draft or rewrite step. The way that a film contract works is you are paid at the beginning of and at the end of every step that you do. So if you have a two-step, a deal with an outline, a first draft and a second draft, you would be paid maybe 10% for the outline, 50% for the first draft, and then 40% for the second draft. It just sort of breaks up the amount of payment you're getting and, in theory, ties your payment to the delivery of materials, which, in theory, makes sense. The reason that this ecosystem is kind of broken down is delivery of the material, I'm putting that in air quotes, is sort of determined by the person who's taking it from you. So if you receive a script and you say, gosh, Colby, we think it's very close to being good, but we would love, these 10 things to change, then your writer is kind of beholden to trying to change those things and trying to do so in like a quick, expedient, not really constituted as a draft revision, and not being paid any extra for that work because it's kind of lumped into, well, we really don't want to send this draft to the financiers yet. We don't think it's ready. They're not going to like it. And it's sort of tied to the fear of like, well, if nobody likes this, we might replace you. So it's become this ecosystem in which, in theory, you should be paid each step of the way as you work. However, you're kind of held up at each checkpoint for weeks, months, years, as far as like the studio kind of continuing to ask for free work for you to revise. And I have a movie that I pitched in 2019. It took them 2 years to hire me, which is insane in and of itself. And then each step of the process, from the outline to the first draft to the second draft, I would turn something in and then 3 months would go by. So something that should have taken, in a contract, you generally have 8 weeks to write a movie, 12 weeks to write a movie. Something that should have taken about a quarter of a year has taken me 2.5 years to get paid for. And so there's both the amount of work you're doing, which is sort of being like boosted while compensation doesn't go up. And then there's the amount of time you're working on the thing, which is also sort of expanded and isn't being taken into consideration for these deals. So part of what the current negotiation is about for features is also trying to tie payment to a weekly structure. And this is another thing that would just like fundamentally change the way that feature writers' lives work. Is if I had been paid weekly for this movie, there would have been an incentive for the people buying it to read it. But there was no incentive currently. So I truly would send it I would wait 3 months, not hear anything, email them once a week to just be like, how's it going, guys? And then hear nothing back. And that would all sort of be constituted as like, well, we're reading it. I was like, no, you're not. So the amount of time between like me delivering a file to them and the actual payment for the file could be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. Like the amount of time that goes by where like you're trying to pay your rent and live your life on this contract and then you're not being paid for it is just sort of like an unsustainable model here.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, look, I've done I've done a fair amount of freelance writing in my world, and basically the way it works in journalism is you write a thing, you get paid for it.
Yes.
When either depending on how it works, either when it gets published or when you file it. Usually when it gets published, and that's fairly straightforward. But it definitely also, unless you are working on a long-term magazine thing or something, it's definitely like you do all the work and then you get paid for it at the end. And then that's just kind of how it is. But with the movies, it is fascinating to me because, as you say, I mean, you're expected, and I the sense I get from most writers is that they try to live up to this. You're expected to finish it in 8 to 12 weeks. You have your time frame. You have when it's due. And if you do that, you send it in, and then nothing.
Truly nothing. The amount of things I've turned in and then heard nothing for weeks is unconscionable. It's actually a wild thing, and it both preys on your economic like position in the world, and it also really preys on just everybody's like insecurities about, did I do a good job? Do you like it? Do you not like it? Am I fired? Like it just, it's like such a discourteous way to do business. And there are currently penalties that the WGA tries to track down for late payment, but I've been paid late on everything I've ever worked on. And it's really hard to track it down over and over and over. And it's just this weird economic model of like, well, we can take advantage of people because most of the time they won't be able to do anything about it. Some of the time they can, but it's worth it to most of the time take advantage of them. And so a big part of the guild action is just like, can we pay writers as they're working? Wouldn't that change everything? Wouldn't that make this like a sustainable career? And wouldn't that put time pressure on studios to read and respond to material and decide whether or not they're going to make it?
And this is one of the things that I believe in the 2-sheet that the WGA sent out when the strike was announced. Wasn't this one of the things that the studios did not counter on, or at least the WGA says they did not counter on?
This is a refused to counter. And so that, going back to your sort of previous question of where do things stand in the negotiation, I'm not on the committee, but just from the external viewpoint of, well, how do you do a negotiation? To receive no counters on half the proposals means that there's no place to go. There is no progress on the negotiation. You can't come back to the table before your co-negotiator has a counter proposal. That just provides you with zero leverage or incentive to come back. So everything the guild has asked for is still the ask, as far as I know. And it's just a matter of will or won't studios respond at all to I think it's a third of the asks are just met with did not respond.
Yeah.
Which is just like not a negotiation.
Yeah. What is the reason for the delay in getting back to? I mean, look, the thing about making a movie is that it's hard and it takes a long time, and I understand that. There's a lot of moving parts that need to be put together, but is it just a function of having kind of too much stuff to do, or what are people doing at the studio?
What are people doing is a great question, and all of this ecosystem works in a little black box where you just don't know. And I think a big part of what overall the guild is asking for here is information. It's, will you tell us how many people watch the stuff? Will you tell us, within a timely manner, whether you've read the stuff? Like, it really is just, will you provide some information for our members? I think that there are a variety of reasons a studio wouldn't respond. One is, do they actually have the money? Like a lot of these companies are dealing with co-financiers and other investors and additional funding sources. And so you get into this position where, they've committed to a project that has taken 18 months. And now do they even have the money to pay for it anymore? Do they want to kind of punt you 2 weeks while they figure out whether they can pay you? That happens. I think there's, people who have too much going on their plate. I think there's people who don't really know how to respond to the material. I think it's a weird confluence of things where, because there's no pressure other than the internal pressure, it just is sort of allowed. There's no disincentive. So why not take your time and take your time? But there has to be a limit to the amount of time you take.
Can we talk a little bit about the difference between a bake-off and kind of pitching a spec script, doing something original?
Yeah.
that you've done? Because one of the things I think, again, that people kind of understand maybe, but don't necessarily think about a lot, is that there are a billion spec scripts floating around. I mean, just like people write, and then it most of the time it goes in a drawer somewhere. I was wondering, from your perspective, again, as a working screenwriter, kind of how those two different processes play out. Like, you get called in, and there are 5 other groups of writers, maybe, or 5 other individual writers, going after the same project, versus like, here, I have a thing, Paramount, would you like to make this thing? What, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, you're describing the 2 roads of making a film, right, from the creative standpoint. There are the projects that are, we as a studio have decided there's some value in this piece of material, and we want to find a way to make it into a movie, and that can be a short story or a book or a documentary or an idea somebody at the studio had, and then, which are all considered like open writing assignments, and that's a big part of the ecosystem of, writing for features. And then there is sort of the second path, which is like an original spec, and that it's spec based on speculative, right? You're kind of taking a shot at will or won't this be a thing anybody wants to make. I think that there are obviously the merits to doing an assignment is you go in for the job, you have a job interview. It's a very protracted job interview, but it is a job interview. And then you do or don't get the job. It's very tidy. It's bankable in a way that an original piece of material might not be. There's a yes or a no, and it comes at a certain date, even if it's a long window to figure that out. The spec market is you write a movie and then you try to find anyone in Hollywood who wants to make it, and it is rewarding in that you get to do the thing you want to do, but it means that you're taking all of the risk inherently on yourself to then retain some control over the material. So I wrote In the Blink of an Eye in 2015. It was on the blacklist in 2016. I spent 2017 meeting producers who all couldn't figure out either how to make it for the budget it needed, or who the director should be, or how to fit it within their slates. I spent 2 years with a producer kind of on a handshake deal, trying to find a director and try to find an actor and try to find money, and none of that ever came to fruition. It all sort of falls apart in different iterations. And met Andrew Stanton, who came on to direct it in 2020. We spent a couple years trying to find someone who would produce it or pay for it. And we convinced Searchlight to do it in 2022, and they shot it in 2023. So it took about 7 years. So there is a path to doing speculative work, but it is generally very long and arduous, and all of the onus of trying to be a producer ends up falling on the writer or the writer's reps or the producer that the writer can find, because there is no infrastructure. It's just you trying to find partners.
Yeah.
And I think that 7 years sounds very daunting, but it also is sort of like the average for an original piece of material takes, a very fast movie is 5 years. So again, when you're talking about like equity and inclusion, the ability to spend 7 years hoping you get paid is sort of a non-starter for most people, right? Like that only comes with immense privilege to be able to say, well, I'm going to try to get this done for a decade and hope it pays off. And so in the meantime, you are cobbling together either a huge catalog of specs that you're trying to puzzle together all the time, or additionally writing assignments that at least come with, you will get paid. You don't have any control, but you will get paid. So it's cobbling those two streams together as far as revenue, and no movie is easy to make. So it really is how quickly and how frequently do you need to get paid for your work?
Yeah. Well, everybody likes to get paid. Everybody needs money.
You have to get paid eventually,
Everybody needs money. That's why they call it money. All right. How is the mood on out in LA on the picket? Have you been hitting the picket lines? You've been carrying the
I weirdly
signs?
Was finishing the movie right as the strike began, so I turned in my work on May 1st and had to say, okay, good luck with the remaining 10 days of the film. I hope it doesn't get screwed up. And have been out of town. And so I just landed back in town. And I'm excited to hit the streets and hit the pickets. I'll probably be there later this afternoon. But I think the mood is in Hollywood overall is righteous anger. I think that this is sort of a negotiation that's been a long time coming. I think that it's one that could or would have come in 2020 had there not been a pandemic. And I think that there's sort of an overwhelming sense between members of different unions that, we're kind of all asking for the same things, which is just, can we have a sustainable future in this business at all? Mm-hmm. And it really feels like if things don't shake out in favor of workers, this is sort of a make or break negotiation for writers, but also actors, also directors, also anyone who's in any of the unions. Like there feels like there's an immense amount of solidarity in a way that, previous strikes and negotiations have not felt like this to me.
Yeah, no, it is. I'll just say that it's fascinating to watch from the outside because it's been a while since we've had one of these, and it feels different. It feels different even than the 2007-2008 strike.
I think there are two big differences. One is, 2007-2008 was the dawn of social media, so you just weren't seeing what it was like to be picketing. You weren't seeing what it was like to be a writer or somebody actually on strike. And I think the other difference is just we are in a time period where I really think that this struggle of workers is a universally understood struggle at the moment. I think the stratification of CEOs compared to people working jobs has gotten so extreme that there is kind of just a fundamental understanding amongst workers everywhere that this is not sustainable. And I think that feels kind of powerful and cool to me, of like, despite everybody being in different industries, anybody I talk to about this is like, yep, that makes sense. You guys should get paid. You make the stuff. And that's an interesting moment within, I think, like the overall labor movement, Yeah.
I always like to close these interviews by asking if there's anything I should have asked, if there's anything you think folks should know about, the work before the work, or anything else with regard to screenwriting, Hollywood, how things are.
Wow. I think in terms of the work before the work, it's very easy from the outside or from the early days of working within the industry to kind of assume that once you get a job, you're in, or once you're working and you're doing great. And it is really a shock to the system to realize that the amount of effort doesn't ever change. The amount of work you have to do to like convince someone, hey, hire me, remains constant. And it's an industry in which it can seem very glamorous from afar, but the day-to-day work of it is very isolated and like kind of tedious. So, we're not all ivory tower writers over here. We're all kind of just trying to like cobble together 25 movies so that 2 happen. And that's it's crazy that is so privileged, and also crazy that it is so difficult even when you are in what's essentially the major leagues. You have to look at the Writers Guild as being like the equivalent of the NFL or Major League Baseball. It's like the top 5,000 players doing it. And those players are struggling to survive. And that's a kind of wild thing when you look at it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a wild time. All right, Colby, thank you for being on the show today. I really appreciate it. Again, you've got a couple movies coming out. Do we have dates or anything on Spaceman or?
No dates. Spaceman will be later this year, probably fall 2023 on Netflix. It's directed by Johan Renck, who did Chernobyl. It's got Adam Sandler in space. What more could you want?
That is going to be, Adam Sandler in space.
Sign me up.
I love me some Adam Sandler. All right, that's great. My name is Sonny Bunch. I am culture editor at the Bulwark, and we will be back next week with another episode. We'll see you guys then.
You loved Lala Kent on Vanderpump Rules. Now get to know her on Give Them Lala.
With her assistant, Jess.
What you did not see is when Raquel arrives and she wants to talk to me, I made her sit in a corner.
Explain.
Sat in a corner booth all by herself in the dark.
Waiting to talk to you.
Waiting for me to finish dancing to 50 Cent. It's my birthday! Sit in a corner.
Give Them Lala, wherever you listen.